What's up, guys? Welcome back to another live stream hand analysis video. Today's hand, we're going to look at a spot where we have an opportunity as the pre-flop aggressor after flop checks through to bluff multi-way on the turn. We're going to talk about two different approaches to it and what we can do in that spot because it is a spot that comes up quite a bit. So I believe there's a straddle on in this 1-3 game in the Lodge. Cup in the cutoff decides to just call the straddle with king, queen of spades. That's a premium. He should be raising. Galen right here in the big blind decides to actually raise with 8-7 of diamonds, and I think that's good. That's a spot where we don't want to have probably just high-ranking cards, bigger pairs. We want to be able to have, especially in a game where we are probably effectively deeper, which this live stream game, I mean, you can clearly see the stacks, like they are definitely deeper than 100 bigs. A lot of the guys are 200 bigs or more, so they're ultra deep in some spots. So I like Galen taking this hand, this suited connector in particular, and raising it because it gives him a little bit of deception, but it's also the kind of hand that when it flops really well, it can end up playing for stacks when stacks are deeper, effectively speaking. So I like Galen raising. And Dylan is on the under the gun straddle, I believe, and he decides to call the Jack 9 offsuit a little bit loose. I believe he is closing the action. It looks like it was a smaller raise, so it's probably not the worst play in the world, but it's a little rough having an offsuit hand like this. It's probably better just to fold, guys. Okay, so my first thought in this spot, typically we want check range from out of position. Tony and I both like to implement that strategy because the live low stakes opponents, they just tend to play a little too straightforward or face up when checked to. When they bet when they're in position or they stab, either one, you could say whichever. Their sizing is often an indicator of where they're at within their range. Now, on a really static board such as 10-10-4 Rainbow, they're not going to be vulnerable at all, so their sizings are I think their hand strength can be a little more hidden through their sizings, but this is a spot still where if it's a static texture like this, I may in fact start betting with top of range, like essentially my 10x or better multi-way, just because I think it's a spot that does get checked through a lot. So exploitively, I think we can do that. If we had to add some bluffs, I think some of the 4x hands are okay. That block some of the bottom or the under folds, like the full houses. You could potentially take a hand that blocks the 10 a little bit and has some back doors like queen jack of hearts, queen jack of diamonds, etc. But for the most part, guys, I think when in doubt, just check this spot, check range out of position when you're in doubt, and you can't go too wrong. So I think it's a good spot for Galen to do this, especially multi-way, guys. Like a lot of the things that we're suggesting, whether it's check range out of position, bet range in position, like those are specifically geared for heads-up pots. When we start to add a third player and we get multi-way, we have to be a little bit careful about being so aggressive in certain spots. So this would be one of them. I think we have a good opportunity to check, see what the field does behind us, because it's very likely that they are going to want to build a pot with trips or better. So they're probably, even on the static board, going to let us know how capped or uncapped they are. And, I think also the fact that they're multi-way, players tend to act a little bit more straightforward. Now, having said that, it is one of the most static boards you could ever see. So it is possible there's some slow plays here, but still not as often, I would say. So once it checks through and we're in Galen's spot now, we have a very interesting card that comes in the 5 of diamonds, bringing in two different draws for us. Obviously the gutter and then the flush draw as well. And when both of our opponents check back, like I said, I think I would range them as typically having some pocket pairs that maybe have some showdown value, and then probably quite a bit of air. I think that in cup spot in the cutoff, I would probably range that player having absolute position as having more air than the player that's under the gun, simply because when both players check to him, that often is a little bit of an indicator or a green light that he could probably go for some thin value and protection with a hand like pocket sevens, for example. So I think most players take that spot and they run with it. Therefore, I would view Cup as not having a pocket pair. I think he just has air and he's just done with the pot a lot of the time. Dylan is the player under the gun that I think can have still some pocket pairs. Obviously, like I said, some air probably still. We can see their hands. We're just trying to range them accordingly, though, guys. So there are two different approaches here. One is that we just start bluffing now. We bet a sizing that hopefully gets us a little bit of information about where our opponent is in their range. And we're not betting as a one and done, guys. Like, we're betting in this spot to get them to put money in to be able to then get them to fold on the river in all likelihood. So, the first option is betting, like I said, and sizing wise, I think we can go something relatively smaller. I think 40% is fine. I think if you wanted to go half pot, that's fine. But I think something between third pot and 40% works really well. It's a sizing that will allow our opponents to now start fast playing their flop slow plays. I don't think a 10 is just going to call third pot or 40% pot. But I do think you'll get calls from some of the pocket pairs that they have, maybe some 4X like 5 or ace 4, maybe 5-4. And then they'll have some draws, like they'll have some diamond draws that might peel there as well. Maybe even some ace high, might be like some ace queen, ace king. It is a live low stakes game. That could be something that was played in this manner. But if they just call that sizing, they're typically going to be very capped. Now, if we're raised, probably more of a slow play and probably not a bluff as often, given that a lot of the bluffs contain the cards that we hold. So this is a spot where I think we're going to have a pretty clear idea of where our opponents are at in their ranges. So that's what you can do first, is you can bet. The other option, which I actually like a little bit better in this spot, especially if we're heads up, but it works multi-way as well, is we can actually check again. And now our opponent is going to feel, or opponents, they're going to feel very comfortable given that we've checked a second time, especially if Dylan checks and Cup stabs. We're going to feel very comfortable that that is going to be a hand that is air a lot of the time. It could be a hand that had some showdown value or has showdown value, but now wants to get a little protection, a little thin value, so it could be a pair under the 10, obviously. But I think it's a spot where check raise works really well, guys. You're now attacking an even weaker range than what you believed your opponents could have on the flop. They're definitely more capped than they were on the flop, so check raise generates more fold equity. So this is a line that I like to take a lot from out of position, where we go check flop and then go for check raise turn with, it could be hands like your 10X. You could do it with some overpairs here, but then you can mix in some bluffs. You can mix in your combo draws. You can mix in some flush draws, straight draws, whatever the case may be, especially if you think your opponents are really wide. So this is a really good spot to take either of those options. If it checks through when you go for check raise, then river, I think, is a spot where you haven't shown really any strength in the hand yet. So you got to be careful about just stabbing river, because you probably do get looked up by a lot of pairs, a lot of ace high. However, when these two check through, when it checks through a second time and you guys get to a river and it's a pretty much a brick, like let's say it's like a deuce, let's say it's whatever, and they have some kind of random half pot or less sizing, and it's just a stab, you could then go for check raise on river. It's not going to probably be as credible as it would have been on flop or turn, but that doesn't really matter all that often. All that matters is your opponent's range is very capped, and you can probably attack it, and they're probably just going to give you credit, even if it doesn't make as much sense to them on the river as it would have on previous streets. So the big thing about the turn in deciding between bet and check raise is, I think multi-way, it actually makes sense to me to maybe start betting myself a little more often, because I think it's more likely to get stabbed heads up than it will be multi-way. If we're heads up, I go for the check flop, check raise turn line a lot more often than I do multi-way. So we'll see what Galen does. I think both schools of thought are really good here. Either way, we have a hand that wants to start attacking one way or the other. So pot's 110 roughly. And Galen bets 40, and that's pretty much perfect, guys. I said we're trying to bet somewhere between third pot and 40%. A lot of players, there's a misconception here that you want to bet as a bluff to get your opponent to fold a better hand. Yes, if your opponent folds a better hand right now, then that is a win. But the best case scenario is that our opponent does peel here with a hand like sixes or a hand like ace jack to get them to then fold to a river barrel. Don't be afraid to drag these guys along in the hand or try to keep them in the hand to then blow them off of their range later if you're very confident you can range opponents accordingly. So yeah, this is a really good spot to bet. I'm pretty sure these two both will snap fold, and Galen does take it down. So yeah, guys, I think it's a really cool spot to analyze turn play when you're the preflop aggressor, when it checks through, when you're out of position. And especially in your multi-way, it does make hands a little bit more interesting. But if you guys aren't considering the check flop and then check raise turn line often enough, especially when you're out of position, start to implement that more, and you're going to see your win rate definitely increase in that particular spot. The second closing point, again, don't be afraid to bet a smaller size in here, expecting that you get some calls because you're likely going to get your opponent to fold river, and you're going to make a little bit extra off of them on the turn than if you just bet really large here, just trying to blow them off of a really weak range and just take down the pot now. So think about that, guys. And if there are any questions or comments, go ahead and let me know as usual. Otherwise, catch you in the next video. Thanks.